In this chapter, we'll be hands-on with Telerik Reporting. We'll start off with the installation steps to get the right tools and packages on your machine. Then we'll create a simple report using the standalone Report Designer tool and integrate it into an existing Blazor application. This will require setting up a Telerik Reporting NuGet package feed. We'll configure the application startup, we'll go through a report viewer setup, and we'll be adding a web API endpoint as well. All this can be automated using a template, which I'll show you. If you want to follow along, make sure you have the course downloads, the code, and the database. After everything is set up and working, we'll add more data to the report, including a graph for visualization, and see the entire flow at work. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to install Telerik Reporting. And there are a couple of different ways to do that. It's just a matter of finding the convenient method to you. If you're a Progress Control Panel user and you already have the control panel, you can use that to easily install Telerik Reporting on your machine. If you're not a control panel user, but you'd like to start using it or see where you get it, log into your account. And right here on the account page, you have this button to download the control panel. Click on that button, download the control panel installer, and run it. Now, once you have the control panel installed, you may already have some products listed here. Right now, I don't have anything installed. I will search for Telerik Reporting. This is the one we want to install, and I'm going to check this box right here that says install and then click proceed. And as you can see under the installation summary, we'll have local demos installed, and then Visual Studio support will be installed as well. Now you also have the option to specify what SQL Server you're using. Since this is just my development machine for demos, I'm using the local instance of SQL Express. But if you have an actual SQL Server installation running on your machine or another machine, you can select it here. Then accept the license agreement, click to proceed, and installation will commence. Now, if you don't want to use the Progress Control Panel, you don't have to. There is another way to install Telerik Reporting. You can download the MSI installer directly, and that's available from your account page as well. Go to Downloads at the top, click on Progress Telerik Reporting. You'll see the latest public version is available with a download link right here, or you can select a different version. And under Installation, you'll see the Telerik Reporting MSI file. That's the same file that's downloaded here, but alternatively with a different version. You can click on this MSI and download it that way. Once you've downloaded the MSI, you can run it to do the installation just like the control panel is doing. Now, when we get to Visual Studio ASP.NET Core integration projects, there's going to be some NuGet packages, and we're going to need to obtain those as well. Those are available right down here too. You can download them directly from your account right here, or we can set up Visual Studio with Telerik NuGet private feed, which is the way I prefer to do it. And also, those packages will be automatically linked in your solution. Now, back to the Progress Control Panel. Once the installation is completed, under Installed Products, you'll see Telerik Reporting listed among other products you might already have there. Reporting also comes with Visual Studio templates, and if you open Visual Studio, you can create a new project. And if you search for reporting, you can see all the Telerik Reporting Visual Studio templates installed. At this point, you should already have the Report Designer installed on your machine as well. This is the tool that we'll be using extensively in this course. Now we're going to jump in and start building reports. So if you don't already have it open up Telerik Report Designer, which we've installed in the last lesson. And here you'll find a pretty familiar interface if you've used Microsoft Office products in the past. We're going to click on the new button here in the left navigation, and you'll see a few different templates available for you to start off with. We're going to start with a blank report here, but you can also check out some of these other templates that could give you a head start. You do have to be familiar with how to use some of these before you jump in, and that's why we're going to build something completely from scratch first. So make sure blank report is selected, and then select a location where you'd like to store your reports. You can click on Browse and specify a location of your choice. I already have my reports folder here in the directory that I've chosen previously, so I'm going to click on that. This is going to bring up that directory, and it will ask me to save it under a different name. I'm going to call this one RPS Dashboard Report. Notice the extension is TRDP. That means these are reports that are created with Telerik Report Designer. However, keep in mind that you can also use the Web Report Designer, which we'll talk more about later in the course. I'm going to click Save here, and this will bring up the Report Designer interface. This is where we're going to be working. And this is the default layout that you'll get when you start up Report Designer. The main design surface is this large area in the middle. Then on the right, you have the Data Explorer, Report Explorer for the different sections of the report. Don't worry, we'll get into all this in a bit. Down at the bottom, there's properties for different components that we're going to be dropping into the report. And we're going to have a data-related area down at the bottom panel. At any point, you can go to the View menu at the top and enable or display any of these sections. So for now, we want to set up our workflow and then fill in the report details. And in order to do that, I'm going to create a very simple report, and all it's going to have in it is just a text box. This way we don't have any external dependencies like data connections. Go to the Insert tab and then click on this text box right here. Let's call this my RPS dashboard. Make sure you save this file, and guess what? We've created your first report. We're going to integrate this into an existing application next. We're going to integrate our existing report that we've just created into an existing RPS tracker application. You should have already downloaded this project from the GitHub repository I mentioned earlier. And if you've just set this up for the first time and opened this project, it has references to Telerik UI for Blazor. So it's going to request that you log into your Telerik account. We're going to be working with this on a web project. Expand it and make sure that under dependencies and packages, you don't have any missing packages here. You should have Telerik UI for Blazor installed and referenced. Now, if you run this real quick to do a test, this is our sample application. This is the dashboard screen. In fact, this chart down here is what we're going to be reproducing with our report. And then you have a backlog page with a list of issues. And you also have a report link up here, which doesn't go anywhere yet. But we're going to go back to Visual Studio and use one of the templates to create a new page to host that report. So expand components and then pages. This is where we have our pages. We're going to right click on pages and go to add, select new item, and then click on show all templates. We want to take a look at the templates that were installed with the reporting solution, and under search for report. Here you'll see Telerik Blazor Report Designer, Report Viewer. Since we're working in a Blazor project that already has references to Blazor, we're going to use the Telerik Blazor Report Viewer native page. Let's give this a name. I'll call this report and click add. The template has a little workflow where you can configure how it's going to work. And there's several ways that you can approach this depending on your needs. For example, if you're using a report server, which we don't cover in this course, but if you already have one in your organization, you would just point to it and log in. We're going to be using a REST service. When you select this, you have two other options. Use an existing REST service, which can be hosted somewhere else or in another application running on the current machine or another machine. Or we can create a new REST service right within this application that we're in. And that's, of course, the simplest approach. And that's the one we're going to demonstrate here. So I'm going to click next. And this is asking us to select a report definition for the report viewer. Right now it's pointing to a sample report definition, but we're going to change that in a bit. Let's click next here. You can optionally enable accessibility for your report page, and I'm going to click finish. Now what this template does is configure several steps for us, steps that we would normally have to do manually that are done for us automatically. You get a summary of what's been completed in this log file that pops up. First, there was an added folder called reports in the root of our application with a sample report created inside of that. There was a report.razor page added with a report viewer native Blazor component that was placed inside. Now, since we're here, I'm going to change the route at the top to report, since that's what we're referencing in our routes. Let's go back to the log. There was a few NuGet packages installed that are Telerik Reporting related for services and the viewer. Now, if you did host your API service in a different app and your front-end report viewer in this app would just get the Telerik Report Viewer Blazor native NuGet package, and your API application would get these other two NuGet packages. Furthermore, there was a controllers folder added with a reports controller inside of that. So this is a web API controller that's going to host our report service. We're going to take a look at program.cs that was modified shortly, and there was some added dependencies in app.razor. So the dependencies in app.razor are these links right here. These are script links and style sheet links that are related to Telerik Reporting. Now let's go back to program.cs. There's been a few changes here as well. First, we're referencing a few of the Telerik Reporting namespaces at the top. Then we're adding Newtonsoft JSON package to the builder services. We're adding controllers to the services, MVC, and then this report service configuration. This registers the storage as file storage, which means that we're going to use files that are report definitions and use them in the application. And the report source resolver is going to find the files inside of our application here. This get reports directory has also been added all the way down here. A little helper method that basically gets the reports folder within our current running application. Let's run this application and see what it looks like. Our dashboard pops up, and if we go to the report link in the navigation bar, here you'll see our report viewer pop up. This is the native Blazor report viewer, and then that gets populated with the report, the sample report. This is a very dynamic report that you can manipulate and expand these items here. And you can also change the date. These are parameters. We'll discuss these more later on. Now, a lot of configuration happened automatically for us in the previous lesson. While you can do all those steps manually, using the Visual Studio template saves you a lot of steps and keeps you from tripping up and accidentally leaving something out or adding something unnecessary that might compromise security in your application. Now, of course, you don't want the sample report in here. You want to use the report that we've created. So let's close the running application, and we're going to go back to the reports folder and that RPS dashboard report that we created a couple of lessons ago. Let's copy this, and we're going to paste it into our reports folder here. So let's open this in Explorer, and we're going to paste it right next to the sample report. Ours is called RPS dashboard report. Let's go back to Visual Studio, and we're going to change the build action of this report to content. If you're ever in doubt, just duplicate what the template did for you. So if we look at the sample report, you'll see that the build action is content and copy to output is set to copy of newer. And we're going to do that same thing here as well. Build action content, copy to output directory, copy of newer. Great. Now the report is hosted in the report page. So let's open that up. Here's our report viewer, and you'll see that the report viewer has a property that it binds called report source. And report source is exposed in code. Here's report source, and it's pointing to the sample report TRDP. Well, instead of sample report TRDP, we're going to use our own. So we're going to say RPS dashboard report.trdp, and let's run this. Now let's go to report, and you'll see the report viewer pop up. And there's our very simple report, but it's a good proof of concept. My RPS dashboard has been rendered. This is actually one way we can iterate on the report by opening this up in Report Designer, making modifications, saving the file, and because the file has changed, it's going to be detected as new. It's going to overwrite what we have. And let's go back to the report. There it is, my RPS dashboard 2. In this lesson, we're going to add some data to our report. And right now we have a very basic looking report with just one text box. Let's get some simple table data in here just so that we can see some data coming through from our data source by hooking up a data connection in our report. All right, let's go back to our project and we'll open up the RPS dashboard report TRDP file that's inside your Visual Studio project. This is the one that we'll keep working on now because it's the one that's going to be updated in the application when we make changes to it. So go to Open Containing folder and you can double click on it to open it up in Telerik Report Designer. We no longer need this text box in here, so select it, then click on Report Explorer on the right. Here you'll see that the text box is listed in your report tree. Right click on it and click Delete. Next, I'm going to insert a table here. So go to the Insert tab at the top and click on Table. You can either insert the table directly or use a wizard. Let's start with a wizard. The wizard will help me choose the data source and configure things for me. And right now, our report does not have any data sources associated with it. So click on Add New Data Source. There's a lot to pick from, but it's pretty common for people to be using SQL data source. So that's what we'll do. And I'm going to call this one RPS items. Let's press OK on that one. This will ask you if you want to use an existing data connection, if you have one already, or you can build a new one. Since we're seeing how this works from scratch, let's go ahead and build a new data connection. The data provider is SQL Client Data Provider, and next we need a connection string. Do you remember where I showed you how to get that? Well, if you go to Visual Studio and go to View, SQL Server Object Explorer, you can expand the SQL Express instance, Databases, and there's our RPS database. Let's right click on that and go to Properties, and under Properties, find Connection String. Just go ahead and copy that entire string, go back to Report Designer and paste it in. Now at the bottom here, I'm getting an error about the connection being unsuccessful and Trust Server Certificate not being supported. So I'm going to remove that and just say encrypt false. Then click Next. Here you can use a shared connection or embed it in the report definition. I'm going to use a shared connection. because this way I can extract that connection string and use it in multiple places, and the report will use the host application's connection string. I'll show you that in a moment. You can leave the alias as is and click next. Now, this is your data source command. You can use a stored procedure. I don't have any stored procedures here, but you could. Or we can paste in a select statement. Or we can use this query builder, which is very handy. Let's do that. The query builder is there to help us generate the query command. So let's expand this and select the items. You can pick and choose whichever fields you want, or you can just select all the fields. This will populate and give you a little preview at the bottom. Click OK. And here's our SQL select statement from that table. Click next, and if you click on execute query, this will give you the preview of the actual data that's coming from the database, the first 10 rows. So you can just validate it very quickly. And when you click finish, you'll see that our data source is now set up. Now on the next page, you'll see that we can now map the data source fields to the table columns. So our data source is already here. You can see it behind the wizard. RPS items is right there. Now we're just picking and choosing whichever columns we want to show in the table that we're going to display. So let's add ID. I can drag it over, and let's add title. And I want to add date created. And notice the date created is of type system.datetime, which is a .NET type. Being that it's a .NET type and it's a complex type, you have all these different parts of date time that can be used and exposed separately. So you can take the year, for example. I'm going to remove that one, and I'm just going to drag in the date. This is going to be important to know when we create calculated fields later on. And that's enough for now for our demo purposes. Let's click next. Here you'll see a little preview of what our table will look like with our columns. On this page, you can add a style or a theme. We're going to leave this alone for now because we'll come back to styling in another chapter. Click next, which will give you a summary of everything we're doing, and click finish. All right, there's our table. So essentially the wizard created two things for us. It created the table like we wanted to, but also because we didn't have a data source, it created the data source as well. Sometimes using a wizard hides all the different things that happen behind the scenes for you, but that's what happened. You could do these things individually by going to data and then SQL data source, set up your data source separately, and then have the table reference an existing data source. Now, if you go to home and then preview, you'll be able to see actual data coming through in your report. And there's about 200 items in there in the PT items table in your database. So this is live data coming from the database. To switch out of preview mode, go back to design view. Now, if you want to see more information about the data source, you select the data source, and on the right, you'll see properties. Connection string is RPS. There's your select command right there. And if you select the actual table in the report, under the Data Explorer tab on the right, you'll see what data source this table is using. And under Report Explorer, you'll see how this table is actually generated. It's a combination of rows and columns and text boxes. All right, I'm going to make sure that this is saved. And let's go back to our web application and run it to preview it. Let's go to Report, and we get this strange error here. Well, this is perfectly normal, and it's actually a very important error for you to know. And the reason for this error is because we used a shared data connection when we designed the report. Our application doesn't have any idea about what database to connect to. So we need to define our connection string inside of our appsettings.json file. I'm going to put a comma after allowed hosts, and then I'm going to add connection strings. We have to give it a name, which has to match what we used in the report, and that was called RPS. Then we can specify the connection string and the provider name. That's system.data.sql client. The connection string is, of course, the same one we were using all along. So let's view properties on our database there and grab that connection string, copy it, and we'll paste it in right here. But don't forget to edit our connection string so it's the same as we have in the report designer. We removed a few of these keys in here. Trust service certificate. Let's get rid of that. And we'll set encrypt to false. All right, now let's run this and hope that it works. Go to report, and there it is. It is a lot of data to page. We'll take a look at paging later on. But the good news is that we are getting some data in here, and this is actually working with our live data in our SQL database. Now that we have some data coming into the report, let's see how we can visualize our data slightly differently using a graph. On the dashboard of our application at this time, we have a chart right here. This is a Kendo UI chart, and I'd like to show the same data in our report. Now, because I've designed this report, I already have some background knowledge about the domain, so I don't expect you to have this knowledge. And that's why I'm going to take you through this. So for this lesson, you can follow along if you'd like, but it would probably be more beneficial if you just pay attention to what I'm doing, because I'm going to add a chart, and the data queries that I'm going to have are going to be a little more involved than the simple table that we implemented so far. After you watch it, you can try it on your own and then rewatch this one. Let's head over to our report file, and I'm going to double click on this to open it up in Report Designer. Make sure you're on the design view, and I'm going to delete this table right here. In order to delete the table, you can select the table in the design view, or you can just go to the Report Explorer on the right, and in the details section, you can select the table, right click on it, and click delete. Great. Let's give us a little bit more working space. Now, previously, when we inserted the table, the data source came right along with it as part of the table wizard. That's one way to insert the data source, but there is another way. If you go to the Data tab, you can insert a data source this way, and that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to click on SQL Data Source. And as you can see, we already have an existing connection called RPS. This is the one that we created earlier, so now we can reuse it. I'm going to click Next here. Using a shared connection is fine. And now I need a select statement. This is where my previous domain knowledge comes in handy here. In order to show the chart, and as it's called in Telerik Reporting, a graph, I need to be able to select certain fields from the items table. So I'm going to paste in my select query here. This is where my domain knowledge comes in handy. I want to select a few fields, and I want to filter these by status. Status 8, 4, or 16. These just represent closed, open, and reopen items. Let's click Next, and I'm going to click Execute to test out the query. And let's click Finish. Now notice that we have a new data source right down here. There was an option to name it when I created the data source, but I didn't use that option. Instead, I just created the data source, and it gets a default name. But I can still rename it in the Properties panel. So I'm going to call this one Chart Data. Naming your data sources is a good practice because you're probably going to have quite a few of them here. Now let's go to the Insert tab and actually insert a column graph or a column chart right here. It's under Charts, select Column, and we want this one right here, the Stack column, because we want to see open and closed items to be displayed in the same chart in the same columns. When you select that option, you'll get a wizard that asks you to select which data source you want to use. And I want to use the chart data source. There is another place where you can create a new data source if you didn't already create one before. Click Next, and here is where we can select how the data is displayed. We need something for categories, values, and series. Now for series, these are going to be the closed items and the open items, and this is going to be based on the status. It won't actually be the status, and I'll show you why momentarily. We're going to change that. But for now, let's select status. Status is an integer field, and we have multiple statuses, but we only have 2 series we want to display based on the statuses that we select. So what we're eventually going to do is create calculated fields, and I'll show you how to do that momentarily. Our categories are going to run across the bottom of the chart, and they're going to be based on dates. So for now, I'm going to expand date created, which is a date object, and I want them to be displayed by month. So for now, I'm going to drop month in here in the categories, which is also going to change based on a calculated field. We'll do that shortly as well. And finally, the values. These are going to display how many of each closed and open items there are in each month. If I drag this here, you'll see that we have an aggregate function of sum. You can actually change that on the right here. We want to have a count, but we also want to base that count on a calculated field. So we'll be changing that later as well. All this is to show you how this can be set up, but then you can actually modify these properties later on. I'm going to click Finish, and here we have a basic graph. This is based on the actual data that's coming in from the database. So even in the design view, this data is being shown to you from a live data source. If we go to the Home tab and then Preview, you'll see the actual preview looks the same here as well. So let's go back to Design, and we'll make some more modifications. First, let's add some calculated fields to our data source. Select the chart data source here, and then in the properties, you'll see under data, calculated fields. Right now, we have none, but you have a little drop down to the right where you can add calculated fields. I'm going to click on New, and the first field is going to be State. So the state is going to be based on status, and it's going to be of the type string. We're going to use an expression to generate this calculated field. And you can type it in right here, or you can build up the expression using a wizard, which we can access right here. Again, here you can select an existing field, or you can create an expression. So I'm going to click on expression, and here's an expression builder where you have functions that you can add, operators, global objects, the field that you already have to work with, report parameters and report constants. I'm going to use a function here, and I'm going to select logical because I want to be able to set the state, whether it's open or closed, based on status. So I'm going to use the if operator, and I can just double click on this in order to populate it inside the expression here. Then I need to take a look at the field section and then status. So I'm going to double click on status to populate it in the expression. You can either type it in or you can double click. Either way works. So if the status is going to be equal to 8, I know this because I have domain knowledge, then our state is going to be open. It's going to be the string open. Otherwise, the state is going to be closed. And that's it. Now I'm going to click OK here and OK again, and you'll see the new calculated field is added to the list of the fields that are available in our chart data source. Now the calculated field has an italic font, so you can tell it apart. Great. Let's add one more calculated field. I'm going to go over here, add one more, click new, and this one is going to be called date. And I want these dates to be strings as well because I want to format them the way I like them. So I'm going to build another expression. Let's go to functions and then conversion, and I want to convert to a string. Then I need a format function that's going to be under text and then format. And here I need to provide the format string for the date. So I'm going to use 0:mm.yyyyy. So I want the month and the year to be displayed. And the field that I want to look at is going to be under fields and then date created. And that's it. There's my calculated field called date. So how are we going to use these calculated fields and the rest of the fields to display on the chart? Well, if you remember, along the bottom we have our categories for the chart, and these currently are months from the date created field. Instead of that, I want to use our new date object in the Report Explorer. Let's select the graph. We have our category groups right here, which are defined as date created month group, and I'm going to change these up. So I'm going to remove date created month group, and I'll add a new one. Let's call this one date group. For groupings, I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to add a new grouping. We're going to group by that new date field that we've created, which is a calculated field. So in here, you can see that all our fields look the same. There is no italicized form here because by the time we get here, it doesn't matter to the chart. To the chart, all the fields look the same. So fields.date is what we want to select here. And now you can see it in groupings. We have our field.date there. If you expand this, you'll see grouping number 1 equals field.date. We also want to sort by the field.date, and we want to do that in ascending order. So let's select fields.date, and here's a direction that you can change, selecting either ascending or descending, and then click OK. Great. Well, what happened here? Where's all our data? Well, now we need to define a series. Let's head down here in the graph properties to the series groups. Instead of the status group, I'm going to change that up. And I'm just going to rename this to state group instead of status group. This is not going to be based on fields.status. Instead, it'll be based on fields.state. That's going to be our grouping. And for sorting, we're going to have sorted by fields.state in ascending order. That's fine. Let's click OK here and scroll down. And finally, we're going to get to our series that we need to define. And let's expand this a little bit so that we have more space to work with. We'll start working with the data here and the category group. As you can see, the category group right now is date created month group. We want to switch that out to date group and make sure that state group is selected in series group. Now here is where we have the Y values. And the Y values, remember, we set those to be status and the count of status when we were going through the wizard initially when we created the chart. But we want to change that to state instead. So instead of count field status, I'm going to just change that to count field state. And let's click OK. OK one more time. And once we've done that, you can see that now we only have 2 colors here, 2 series, closed and open. Now we're going to be styling this a little bit more later on. For now, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's go back to our application and take a look at what we have so far after we run it. On the dashboard of the application, this is what our chart looks like. This is kind of what we want our chart to look like in the end in the report. Let's click on the report page. Oh boy, well, that's not very close as far as design, but at least we have a chart in here, don't we? And it's pretty good progress so far. We're going to work on styling parameterization, and other few advanced topics in the coming chapters.